Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us here today for the first of our policy action meetings. My name is Jeff Garris. I am the Outreach and Partnerships Director here at the Pennsylvania Policy Center. Pennsylvania Policy Center, we just kind of got up and running here over the summer. We're really excited to be working together. Many of us on this team have worked together in the past. We've worked together with you. We're really excited to be able to have this opportunity to really kind of expand the work that we're doing and kind of refine and fine-tune our focus as an organization. We are committed to providing actionable research on policy solutions that will really work to improve lives for all Pennsylvanians. The purpose of this series is to be able to talk about what some of those policies are and help our friends and allies and supporters get to know a little bit more about some of these policies, as well as opportunities for you and your organization or you and your friends to take action on important issues for Pennsylvania. We're going to do a quick introduction here of our team members. We have a growing team here. We're going to start off first with some introductions from our communications team. Tom's team, take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kirsten Snow. I'm the Director of Communications for the Pennsylvania Policy Center.
Hey, everybody. I'm Adrienne Stanley, she, they pronouns. I'm the Deputy Digital Director for the Pennsylvania Policy Center.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erica Freeman, and I'm the Deputy Communications Director at PPC.
From our administrative team, we have here with us today Mark Steer, who is our Executive Director. You're going to hear from him shortly. Levana Landecker, our Deputy Director, is not able to be here with us today, but you'll be seeing and hearing a lot more from Levana in the days, weeks, and months ahead. We're also pleased to have a great policy research team that's doing a lot of the work into these policies and how they would impact Pennsylvanians. Obviously, Mark is a critical part of that, but we're also pleased to have a very new member, the newest member of our team, who is going to figure out very quickly to unmute that mic and give a quick introduction.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Kasten. Yeah, I'm very excited to be doing research with PPC. I'm very happy to be here. My pronouns are he, him. Yeah, and I'm a policy analyst.
Thanks so much, Kasten. Also, a senior advisor here with us today, a longtime friend and ally. Do a quick introduction as well from our senior advisor.
Hi, my name is Susan Gobeski. I've done policy work in Pennsylvania for a long time, and I'm a huge fan of Pennsylvania Policy Center and many of you that I know. So glad to see you all.
Great. Thanks so much, Susan. Thanks to all of you on the PPC team. It's great to have such a wonderful mix of workers and colleagues, co-workers with so many great skills and experiences that they bring to this job. As we move forward, want to let folks know that we are the state affiliate of the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Some of you probably go to look to them for research on federal issues. We do that as well here. We work closely with them. I'm dropping into the chat right now a list of where you can follow Pennsylvania Policy Center online, our website, some of our social media accounts that we have. Want to encourage you to follow there. That's where we will be providing up-to-the-minute information as we go forward throughout the year and into next year. We are going to be doing these policy action meetings, as I said, each for a third Thursday at 1 p.m. We're going to take a deep dive looking into a particular policy issue, kind of helping folks who maybe aren't necessarily policy experts understand a little bit about why these policies are so important for Pennsylvanians, as well as how you can take action. If you have questions throughout these meetings, you can drop them in the chat. If you would like to get on the list to receive regular updates about these meetings and information in between meetings, you can send a quick message to me here in the chat today. You can just direct message it and I will add you to that list. Just give me your name and your email address. We'll be able to do that. On that note, our focus today is on the newly enacted 2023-24 Pennsylvania budget. As we noted in our publicity for this ahead of time, we're really pleased to hear from the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Policy Center, Mark Steer, my friend, colleague, and my boss. Mark, take it away. Oh, sorry, one last thing. if you have questions throughout this, please drop them in the chat. We'll try to get to those and provide opportunities for you to either ask them directly or we'll read those for Mark. We are going to take questions at the end, so please drop any questions you have in throughout, and we'll get to those when we have the opportunity to do that. If you have any tech problems, please note that in the chat too, and Adrian will help with that. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Thanks, Jeff. Really great to see all of you here. I know many of you are friends of the previous organization, friends of mine, friends of other people on the staff, and others of you who are new, welcome. We hope you'll join us on a regular basis as we discuss state and federal policy on these monthly calls. Today, I'm going to be talking about the state budget. Jeff got a little ahead of himself. We're not quite totally enacted. We're partly enacted. And I'm going to give you a bit of the play-by-play over the last 3 or 4 months so that you know exactly where we stand now and what still needs to be done. I'm going to go back to March when Governor Shapiro presented his budget. At the time, we said that the governor's budget had the right priorities, but had insufficient funding in many areas. Among the priorities he emphasized was education funding, with a $570 million increase in basic education funding and more money for special education pre-K. Workforce development, where there was a major investment. Student mental health, where he called for spending $100 million for student mental health across the Commonwealth. A new program to provide indigent defense. We're one of the very few states that doesn't have state funding to help indigent people who are accused of a crime get legal help. Those are all great investments, and we thought they were the right priorities for the state. However, the governor's budget was pretty austere. It was in a series of austere budgets our governors have presented. And let me say one last thing about the revenues in that budget. It relied on between the spending in the budget the governor presented, the expenditures were about $2 or $3 billion more than the revenues the state was expected to generate over the course of the 23-24 fiscal year. Just to remind you, our fiscal years begin on July 1st, so we're in the middle of a new fiscal year. It will go through June 30th of 2024. So you also know that we have a balanced budget requirement. So how are we making up for this about a $2.5 billion gap between expenditures and revenues? We're doing it with the accumulated revenues that we had at the start of the year. As we've been pointing out all along, the state has as of June 30th, $13 billion in the bank. $5 billion of it is roughly in the rainy day fund, and there was about an $8 billion surplus from the previous year. So where did the surplus come from? Mostly from federal funding. As you know, in the aftermath of the pandemic, the federal government provided a lot of funding, not just to individuals, but to states. Most of the funds that Pennsylvania received was not spent. It was put into the general fund budget, but it was not spent by increasing the budget. Even though there were many times we and many of you lobbied the General Assembly to put more money into some of the pressing needs at the time and continuing for housing assistance, say, or for assistance for folks with low incomes. That's not how the General Assembly decided to spend the money, and they basically been saving it. If you look at the governor's budget projections for the next 5 or 6 years, back in his March presentation, it's clear he plans on spending down the surplus over the next 3 years. First spending the surplus in the general fund budget, and then drawing down the rainy day fund, which is about $5 billion. I think that's a questionable practice for 2 reasons. One is we do need some money in a rainy day fund in case there's another recession. And second, because ultimately we're going to run out of money. That big surplus is going to go away in about 3 years if we spend at current levels. If, as we should do, we increase education funding to respond appropriately to the education funding lawsuit where the courts ruled that our system of funding schools was unconstitutional, we're going to have to spend even more money. So we can't indefinitely keep spending without bringing in more revenues. And that's something that is an issue we're going to have to address maybe this year, or if not, in the next couple of years. How to get the revenues we need, not only to support the current level of funding, but the additional funding that we need in so many areas, starting with K-12 education, but also including higher education, pre-K education, healthcare, and housing, and many other subjects. So governor presents a budget in February or March. This year was March because he was a new governor. We give new governors an extra month to get things under control. And then, as you know, we typically wait for negotiations to take place between the House and the Senate and the governor. Now, something new happened this year. In the last 5 or 6 years, we've waited until there was an agreed budget. Sometimes that happened before the end of June. Sometimes it happened in the beginning of July. Sometimes we waited. 1 year we waited for 9 months to the following March. But what happened in those years is we did not see a budget until House, Senate, and governor had reached some kind of agreement. This year was different. This year the House went first, passing a budget in the second week of June. That budget passed the Appropriations Committee and then passed the House with overwhelming Democratic support and no Republican support. Was very similar to the governor's budget, but it added new funding in a lot of areas. There was an additional $100 million, for example, in basic education funding, and then another on top of that, $225 million in Level Up spending. Level Up is a program that directs additional state funds to the least well-funded school districts in the state. There was an additional $50 million for special education, an additional $250 million for school facilities maintenance and improvements, about $45 million for more career and technical education, and then $200 million for the Whole Home Repairs Program, which is a new program that's designed to help low and moderate income people fix up their homes so as to make them more livable, more energy efficient. There's more money for community and economic assistance programs, about $96 million there, an additional $45 million for childcare services and assistance, and about $60 million for gun violence prevention programs. And that wouldn't have increased the amount of money we spent on gun violence prevention programs, but it would replace about $60 million in federal funding we got in the last fiscal year, but that was not renewed for the current fiscal year. So that was a big achievement by the House Democrats. They passed a budget that was significantly better in our view than Governor Shapiro's budget. And because they could rely on later projections of revenues, which showed higher revenues expected for the current fiscal year than the governor showed, they could add all that spending and still put aside $500 million more for the rainy day fund, which Governor Shapiro's budget did not do. I should also mention that this new House budget was not the only good thing the House did over the course of the first 6 months of its being in office. It also passed a minimum wage bill, raising the minimum wage to $15 in 3 years. It passed a bill creating a state earned income tax, piggybacked on the federal earned income tax to help families with low incomes get a little money back from the government and to ensure that no one gets taxed into poverty. It passed a property tax and rent rebate tax cut, which goes to low-income seniors and disabled people in the state, and passed many other bills that were on the laundry list of progressive agenda items that we have been talking about, and many of you have been talking about for many years. So we are quite pleased with the Republican budget. With the House Democratic budget. We did not hear about a Republican budget until much later in the year. And one of the things that happened between the House budget being passed and the Senate budget coming forward is that the issue of school vouchers came to the fore. This happened largely because in response to questions from the Republican state legislature, Governor Shapiro and his Secretary of Education said they were still open to creating a small voucher program that would provide state funds directly to people to enable them to go to enable their kids to go to private school. When that interchange happened and the governor reinforced it with an interview a couple of days later, all of a sudden vouchers became the primary goal of the Republican Senate, which we think was unfortunate for a lot of reasons. I won't go into detail here today, but we strongly believe that any voucher program is a dangerous one. While there may be some limited role for vouchers in special cases where students cannot get a good education in the public school to which they're assigned, the problem with creating a voucher program is twofold. On the one hand, it does nothing to increase the funding for the least funded school districts in the state, and thus it provides what the Republicans call a lifeline to a small number of people, while letting most of our people and most of the kids in our schools that are seriously underfunded sink. What we really need is a program to help all our kids in all our schools get an adequate education and equitable education, not a program to help a small number go to private school. And then the second problem with vouchers is that it will ineluctably lead to lower funding of our public schools. We've seen in other states, particularly Arizona, that once a voucher system is created, demand for it increases, legislators keep putting more money into it, and instead of funding our school system, they put more money into vouchers. And that's a double whammy for our school districts, because on one hand, they're not getting the money they need to provide adequate education. And second, as school districts lose kids to private schools, state funding goes down. So vouchers are a bad education program for those two reasons, and also because there's simply no evidence that they provide better education on the whole. And in addition, there's a lot of evidence that voucher systems tend to lead to corruption of various kinds, misspending on the part of both parents and school districts, spending without accountability, spending at schools that do not provide the kind of education we want our kids to get because they don't have civic education, or because they teach doctrines that are totally incompatible with modern natural science, such as teaching creationism rather than the theory of evolution. So vouchers became the critical issue for the Republicans. And the budget they passed, which they said had Governor Shapiro's approval, had $100 million for a down payment on a voucher plan. It only had $100 million for Level Up rather than $225 million. It only had $50 million for whole home repairs rather than the $200 million in the House budget. It provided less funding in multiple areas where the House Democrats boosted the governor's budget, including community colleges, the Keystone Community Programs, grants to college students, child care services, child care assistance. It didn't have the funding for criminal justice violence prevention programs that the House had included, and thus it would have cut those programs. It provided no funds for the 4 state-related universities. And thus, in many ways, it was far, and one other thing, it called for $150 million in the education improvement tax credit. We call this the bad EITC as opposed to the earned income tax credit, which is the good EITC. The bad EITC allows, basically sends public funds to private schools by allowing corporations to get a 1-to-1 reduction in their corporate net income taxes if they give money to private schools. So the Republican budget was in many ways inadequate. It had some things we wanted in it, such as Level Up and whole home repairs, but not at the level we wanted it to be found. When the Senate passed the budget, there a lot of pressure came on the House Democrats, in part by the Senate Republicans. Some pressure came from Governor Shapiro to pass that budget. There was a lot more pressure on them not to pass the budget, and most of the pressure focused on the voucher issue. I think many of you probably took some action to encourage your state representatives and senators not to support vouchers and not to fund vouchers. Our organization, as well as the PA Schools Work Campaign, did a lot of work trying to make people understand how problematic vouchers were and how bad it was to include them in the budget this year. As a result of all that activity, and because of the leadership of Speaker McClinton and House Majority Leader Matt Bradford, the House Democratic Party was united in opposition to funding vouchers. Now, there was some sentiment among House Democrats to simply vote down the Republican budget and go back to the negotiating table. They didn't do that for basically as a matter of budget negotiation calculations. They feared that many of the good things in the Senate budget would be stricken if the Senate if they rejected the Senate budget and told the Senate they would only pass a budget without the money for the voucher program. I should say that in addition to your work in stopping vouchers and our work in stopping vouchers, we got a real gift from some national leaders for school vouchers, Betsy DeVos and Grover Norquist, who along with some other extremists on education in the national education community, endorsed the Republican plan. And that helped us really explain to people what that plan was, because it's clear Betsy DeVos and Grover Norquist and our homegrown billionaire who supports vouchers, Jeffrey Yass, their goal isn't a $100 million program for school vouchers. Their goal is to replace our public education system with a private education system funded with state dollars. So when it became clear that that's what this program is, that it's a stalking horse with the complete privatization of our schools, the House Democrats were unified and they said no to the Republican plan. But then the issue was, what do you do with this Republican budget that had some features they wanted? So the strategy that they came up with was to vote in favor of the Senate Republican budget, only on the assurance from Governor Shapiro that he would veto the appropriation for vouchers, the $100 million for vouchers. And that's what came to pass. The House voted for the bill with Democrat support. Governor Shapiro vetoed the appropriation for vouchers, and that's where things stood at the end of July. But the budget's not actually done yet, because the appropriation bill, what we call the general appropriation bill, is only one part of the budget. There's also another appropriation bill for non-preferred expenditures, and that's for the state-related universities, Penn State, Pittsburgh, Temple, and Lincoln. Because they are private, public, or publicly supported private institutions, funding for those schools has to be passed by a 2/3 vote in both the House and Senate. And neither the House nor Senate has been able to secure that 2/3 majority to pass funding for the state-related universities. So that's not done. And finally, we need what are called code bills. Now, this is something that you don't see at the federal level, so I'm going to explain how this works. According to the Pennsylvania Constitution, the only thing that can be included in an appropriation bill is a line item saying spend this amount of money on this subject. What you can include in an appropriation bill is instructions on how to spend the money. And for some programs, you need those instructions. So for example, the Level Up program, there's a line item appropriation in the House bill for $100 million, and in the Senate budget, sorry, in the Senate and House passed budget, there's a line item for $100 million. But until the General Assembly passes an instruction identifying who the 100 least well-funded districts are and how much of that $100 million each district should get, that money can't be spent. Similarly, there's a line item in the appropriations bill for a new indigent defense program. But we need another piece of legislation, which would typically be in a code bill, to create that program and say, this is how you distribute the money for indigent defense. Similarly, there's $50 million in the budget for home repairs. But again, we need a code bill to define that program and say how the money will be distributed. Those are the three controversial elements that in the code bills. There are also some other things, housekeeping things, on which the House and Senate are agreed, but without passing those code bills, we actually don't have a budget for many important subjects, including Level Up, indigent defense, home repairs, including a state assessment on hospitals, which helps pay for the Medicare, Medicaid program, which we call medical assistance here, and a couple of other important things. Now, in the aftermath of the House passing the Senate budget and the governor vetoing the voucher bill, there was a lot of Republican criticism of both the House, but even more of Governor Shapiro. They claimed that Governor Shapiro had made a deal with them. Governor Shapiro said, well, yeah, we had an agreement, but it was contingent on the House passing the budget, and I don't control what the House does. Federal government said, well, you promised you could deliver the House, and Governor Shapiro said, I didn't promise I could deliver them. At any rate, there's a lot of bad blood between Republicans and the governor about the voucher program. And frankly, although they've been very quiet about it, there's some bad blood between the House Democrats and the governor as well. Because as I point out, the House Democrats vehemently oppose this voucher program, with only very few exceptions. And anyway, they all would have voted against it. And they feel that the governor should not be putting money into a voucher plan. Even those people who say a voucher plan might be a good idea at some point say the priority is funding public education. First, we have to adequately and equitably fund every school district in the state, and then we can talk about a small voucher plan that might be useful for a small number of kids for whom public schools do not work. Now, we were left in early July with the Senate going home after him passing their budget, not passing code bills. The House passed the budget, didn't have, with the Republicans not there, they went home as well. The Republicans finally came back at the end of August, the Senate, and they passed a code bill. Include most of the things that I mentioned everyone agrees upon, but it did not include any of the Democratic priorities. It didn't include the Level Up program. It didn't include the Home Repairs program. It didn't include the Indigent Defense program. It did, however, include and earning the bad EITC, that is the tax break for corporations to give $150 million to private schools. And that's where we are now. The Senate's back, but has no more work to do on the budget. The House will be back next week. One reason the House did not come back is because due to the nomination of Sarah Namarato, a state representative from Pittsburgh for county executive in Allegheny County, she resigned from office, and we just had a special election Tuesday, which led to a Democrat being elected to replace former Representative Namarato. She will be sworn in very soon as her election is certified, and she should be in Harrisburg next week or very soon thereafter. And with the House coming back, now's the time for the House and Senate to finish the budget. That means finishing the code bills, passing the code bill that includes the agreed things, but also figuring out what to do about things on which there's no agreement. The bad EITC, the program to fund private schools, which the Republicans want, and the Democratic priorities, indigent defense, Level Up for the 100 least well-funded schools in the state, and the whole home repairs bill. I don't know what's going to happen. It's quite possible that a deal will be reached, and Democrats will support the Republican EITC program, and the Republicans will support the Level Up program and indigent defense and whole home repairs. But there's no guarantee of that. Republicans at this point are saying, well, we passed these things in the appropriations bill on the assumption we'd get vouchers. We didn't get vouchers, so maybe now we won't give pass any of this. It's quite possible that none of the programs that Democrats want or Republicans want that have to be funded through a code bill will get passed, and we won't have Level Up. We won't have $150 million from new EITC. We won't have indigent defense or home repairs. I think I'd rather see us waste $150 million on that corporate tax cut for private school donations program and get Level Up, but Senate Republicans may not see things that way. Finally, let me say one last thing. The reason I'm sitting here in my car, as you may have noticed, is that I just testified at the Basic Education Funding Commission hearing in Lancaster, and I didn't have time to find a nice little office space to talk with you. I just got done a few minutes ago. But the Basic Education Funding Commission is formally charged with reviewing the fair funding formula, but it's been informally charged by the governor and by House Democrats and some Senate Republicans to come up with a response to the education lawsuit, which held our funding system unconstitutional. They are taking a testimony now about how much money we need, how that money should be spent in order to ensure that we have an adequate and equitably funded education system. And it's possible that some of the education issues that are carried over and haven't been completed from the last budget will be kicked to that commission, will be dealt with by that commission. And we're expecting a commission report by the end of this year, which will hopefully influence both Governor Shapiro's education proposal and when he presents his budget for the next fiscal year in February, and the debates and ultimate action on the next year fiscal budget. So that's an important thing to watch as well. So I've been talking for a while. Let me stop here and see if we have some questions. Thanks for your patience.
Thanks, Mark. We have a question here from Kelsey. Kelsey's question is, do you have any resources for learning more about code bills? I'm not familiar with these for them.
We actually don't, but we could write something pretty quickly that basically explains how this works. I'd be happy to do that for you.
I'll do a quick search too. I remember a couple months ago when we were getting into the budget season, it might have been Pennsylvania Capital Star, it might have been one of the other newspapers that covers politics in PA, did a little background on sort of what code bills are. I'll see if I can find that and send that to you, Kelsey. Great.
If you know how, let me just
Sorry,
say one last. If you know how the federal government works, it's somewhat similar. The federal government appropriations bill funds the government, but there are authorization bills that create programs. So we can create programs through authorization bills that pass during the year. But if they haven't been passed, then you need a bill that's called a code bill. There's sometimes fiscal code bills, and sometimes they're tax code bills. Sometimes there's an education code bill, a social welfare bill. It depends on where we need authorizing language to enable the government to spend the money that's been appropriated.
Okay, thanks. We have a question from Karen. Karen, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Hi, all. Thank you so much, Mark. This is really useful as always. I'm curious between friends if we have any more nuanced read on the governor and his support, dead fast or otherwise, for a lot of the issues that we've all been hoping to see move with his new administration. I know budgets kind of reflect that, but he's also a political creature and is kind of affected by the winds around him. But do you have any more nuanced read now, having gone through this first budget season, on what we can expect from him in the future?
It's hard to say. One of the things that the governor said and his budget director said is they're looking at the first budget as part of a 2-year process. I think that that's a reflection of two things. One is that it's really hard for a new governor to make a lot of changes very quickly. There's just a lot to be learned about the budget. There's a lot to be learned about the political landscape. I think we discovered that despite his experience in Harrisburg, Governor Shapiro had something to learn about the budgeting process from the governor's perspective, and he created some difficulties for himself that he didn't need to create, and hopefully he's learned from that. But then the other thing is simply that the education lawsuit decision came very late in the process of formulating a budget, and I think the governor wanted to take some time to absorb the decision, to talk with legislators from both parties about how to respond to that decision. So I don't think we'll know exactly where the governor stands on some of the critical issues until we see his budget in February. And I think we have to spend some time talking to the governor and trying to influence the governor, make sure he understands that we are expecting a very big commitment to meet the responsibility of our Constitution and to adequately and equitably fund our schools. I think there are other areas where the governor had the right priorities: higher education, childcare, indigent defense, mental health. But he so far has not been willing to commit to the kind of funding that we need in those areas. So, what's that old line that the newscasters use at the end of their story? It remains to be seen. where Governor Shapiro is going to wind up. I think the one thing that I don't see him shifting on at this point is some support for vouchers. But we really do hope that we can convince him that if there's going to be some money for vouchers, it has to be part of a deal that includes a huge increase in fair funding for our public schools. I don't think he wants to be associated with Grover Norquist and Betsy DeVos or Jeff Yass over the next few years.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for your question, Karen. Appreciate that. Jill has typed into the comments here, I was very discouraged in the Harrisburg hearing on education budget. No good suggestions for fair funding and dumb suggestions about equal funding, not equitable, and state control. And what will we get for our money? Anything better in Lancaster?
The Lancaster hearing had two parts. One, I talked about why education is so important. I talked about just to remind people that who don't quite understand it, that our economy and our democracy really depend on getting kids a good education. I spent a lot of time talking about Thaddeus Stevens because he created our public school system, or he was one of the leading proponents of it in the 1830s. And because his home is in Lancaster. And then others talked about a lot of problems in local school districts around the state. David Lapp from Research in Action presented data on the inequity. I think people on the commission really get now that we have a serious inequity problem. I don't think they totally get that we need a lot more funding too. I mean, some of the Republicans saying, well, our funding levels on average is pretty good, but we have this inequity problem. Well, what they need to understand, what I'm going to send to them in a follow-up comment, is that the reason our average looks good is because we have 10% of schools in the state fund an awful lot, have a lot of money. They use a lot of resources in addition to state resources, and that brings the average way up. But 80% of our schools or 85% are inadequately funded by the state's own standards. And that's what we have to get them to understand. They're going to have to invest a lot more money. So Jill, I appreciate the work you do on education and keep at it. We just got to make clear that this is a priority. And as I said today, it's not just a priority for low-income students. It's not just a priority for Black and Hispanic students. Our economic prosperity is based on the talents and abilities of our kids. And as Thaddeus Stevens said in the 1830s, we've got to nurture those talents. And if we do, we find that the children of poor kids do great things in life. So that's why we need adequate and equitable funding, not just because it's fair, although that's critical, but because we all benefit from it. And the long-term benefit of the state of investing billions more in education will mean billions more in economic prosperity for all of us.
Thanks, Jill, and thanks, Mark. We'll see what happens next. Remains to be seen, as they say. Question here from Nancy from Bucks County. Has the increase in TANF benefits been considered at all?
Sadly, no.
Maybe just a quick background for folks on what TANF is, just so folks who may not recognize the acronym.
So TANF is the program that replaced AFDC, the welfare program, under the Clinton administration. It's a program that's supposed to be used to help the very lowest income people in the state. Unfortunately, it comes in a block grant, and the state can use that for other purposes, and they have been using it for other purposes. And the basic amount of money that we provide to the lowest income Pennsylvanians has not gone up. I don't know. I think Pat Albright, who's I know is here, she would know the answer better than I do. I think it's like 15 years. It's astonishingly how terribly we fund.
1990.
I was going to say it's been more than 3 decades. More than three decades.
Okay.
Not even a cost of living increase.
It's shameful. And while the House Democrats did do something good for folks with low incomes by passing that earned income tax credit, piggybacked on the federal one, there just hasn't been the stomach to address the TANF question. I think that's something that our organization is going to, with also working with the people who've been working on it for some years, we'll take another look at this year and see if we can get the House, the governor and the House Democrats at least to push this as a priority.
Other questions? Anybody want to raise a hand if you have a quick question? Oh, comment there. Pat, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, both in relation to the fight on the TANF increases, which are so urgently needed, $403 a month for a mother with 2 children is just, it's just horrendous, of course. But I also wanted to let people know, to bring to people's attention a federal bill that Congresswoman Gwen Moore from Milwaukee has reintroduced for the 3rd time in this March. That would it's called the Worker Relief and Credit Reform Act, that would redefine work to include unpaid mothers and other family caregivers and students, low-income students in higher education, as dividing them as workers, so that making them eligible for the earned income tax credit at the highest level for the first time. So I just wanted to put that out there, and it also kind of course, relates to the TANF fight, that we're treated on TANF as if we're just that we need to have these workers' comps, and we're just treated like dirt, basically. And this is a bill that we're hoping that idea can spread out also on a state and even local level about the earned income tax credit. So I just want to mention it, that this is a federal bill that we hope can be reflected in other ways and help us fight for increases in TANF. And the other thing that we've been working on with the global women's strike is that because with TANF being so low, it means more and more children are taken because of poverty. And there's money to fund the child welfare system, but there's not money to increase benefit levels for mothers. And other ways that we end up being impoverished, the lack of the child tax credit, being extended tax credit being continued, and so on and so forth. But anyway, people who are interested, we are going to be holding a congressional briefing and press conference with Congressman Gwen Moore's office on October 24th in DC. So if anyone's interested, you can get in touch with me. I'll put my email in the chat. We can send you information on that.
Thanks so much, Pat. And thank you to all of you for the great questions that you've submitted. We are at the end of our time here. We do want to try to keep these monthly policy action meetings to about 45 minutes. We're just about at that point right now. Our next meeting, and again, will be on the 3rd Thursday of each month. It's coming up on Thursday, October 19th. We'll be getting some information out to you fairly soon about what the topic will be for that, so you can start maybe doing some research if you'd like to ahead of time. Again, I'm going to drop here in the chat where you can follow us online on the different social media platforms that we're part of. I forgot, Adrian, to drop in Threads there. Sorry, if you want to put that in again, that would be great. I am going to drop in one more time here into the chat the resources on the state budget, so you have those available there. I do want to note that there are some kind of interesting things happening right now at the federal level around the federal budget. There is a strong possibility that in a little over a week and a half, we could see a federal government shutdown because of extremists in the House Republican caucus. We'll send out a follow-up email from this meeting today. We'll give you access to the video and the chat from this. Any notes that we took, you'll be able to access, share with others, help to publicize this for folks who may not have seen it. We'll get that out to you fairly soon, hopefully before the end of the day tomorrow. Along with that, I'm going to send out some resources about the federal budget standoff, where things stand at the moment on that. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you to Mark and to the rest of the PPC team for helping to make this meeting happen today. Thank you to all of you for the fantastic questions, for all the great work that you do. Again, 3rd Thursdays, 1 p.m., policy action meetings. Next one, Thursday, October 19th. Have a great day, everybody.